you've seen the last couple of videos, you might think my Audi R8 is complete. Well, unfortunately, it's not. Because it's still missing quite a few parts to complete this car, and a lot of them are on back order, which is what I've been waiting for. So we bought this Audi R8 in pretty rough shape from Mark McCann after he'd rallied it around on his field before he was going to turn it into his dream off-road supercar, which that plan never came to life. So we were left with one completely stripped back Audi R8 and a garage full of parts ready to start reassembling it, but there was one massive job which we had to do first, and that was trying to clean the car because it had mud in every nook and cranny you could possibly imagine and more. We took hours trying to get this right. So after lots and lots of jet washing and cleaning everything as best we could, we got the car dry ice blasted to make sure it was going to be 100%. And once we were happy with that, we got the car painted in its entirety to make sure there was no blemishes or imperfections, and then reassembled it back to how it looked before Mark got his hands on it. But we didn't have everything we needed to do this because some of the parts were on back order, which was really going to hold us back. But now they're here, we can get this car finished off and boxed off once and for all and get it back to its completely original, clean factory specification which we've been aiming for from the start of the project. So we can stick the car up on quick jacks, ready to start work on it and get it finished. Well, we've got loads of under trays and plastic trims to go on, but before we do any of that, I feel like this is now a logical time to do a quick service on the car and make sure that it's going to be good for the next 5,000–6,000 miles without being touched. So that is where we're going to start. But on an R8, that is not such a simple job. And that's because Audi R8s have a dry sumped engine, which means they've got 3 sump plugs, which is much more complicated than your normal engine. So I think I'm right in thinking there's one here which is a little bit wet, which means the plug and the washer needs changing. There's one here, and there should be another one somewhere else very nearby, and I believe there's also a plug in the bottom of the oil tank in the engine bay as well. So we need to drain all 3 of those, and then we can change the filter and put some fresh oil in. It takes 10 litres this car, which is nuts. No. That didn't go so smoothly. Right, let's leave that to drain for a sec. This is a little bit tighter than you'd hope. Let's see if it's going to be awkward. I missed again. Well, apparently Audi sell a special tool for this, but it's also quite common just to cut down a spline. So I'm going to take off some off the back, which will hopefully give access then to take that third one out. That should do it. And while that one's draining, I'm going to crack this one off as well, so it hopefully makes it a bit easier. Let's see if it still doesn't fit. More trimming required. That is way too tight. No, not good. Yes. No, I can't get my spanner out. Come on. Yes. Oh, I'm so glad. So after a good battle with that sump plug and nearly rounding it off, I just managed to get it cracked off. And I'm really not very good at draining oil on cars. I just seem to get it everywhere every time. Now you can see why I've been struggling with this so much. I think what's happened is the splines have got full of dirt, making it really hard to get your socket in there. Someone's given it a try before, rounded it a bit, tried mole grips on the edge of it, which didn't work, but luckily by cutting that other one down and then pushing it in there with like a set of pliers and like levering off the bar, I've just managed to get it cracked off. But I think it was very close to never coming out again without, you know, some specialist help. But we got there in the end. And now, because that one will never go back in, we've got 3 nice new sump plugs to go in. This really isn't the easiest thing to do, but hopefully whoever does this in the future won't have that same problem. I'm not sure why they made this sump plug so tricky to get to on this engine. It seems like a bit of a faff really, but I'm sure with the right tool it's a doddle. Then this is the final bit that we need to drain. It's positioned very awkwardly because, well, I think there's no way it's not going to make a mess, but you know, we've got to do what we've got to do, I guess. Let's crack this off. There we go. Not as bad as I thought. Not as bad as I thought. Now we just need to change over the oil filter and pop in some fresh oil, and we should be good to go. We've already done the air filters because we've popped the new pipe across ones in. The spark plugs are supposed to be long life ones, and we've got a receipt for those being done fairly recently. Quite a simple service really, not as bad as you'd think. So now we're just going to pop out the oil filter housing, which takes a 32mm socket, so once we've wound that out we can just pull it out and swap the oil filter over. I'm going to try and save as much mess as possible and try and pull the oil filter straight into the drain pan. 3, 2, 1. Not too bad. So oil filter removed, we've just got the O-ring to take off here as well, which should be relatively easy. Then a new genuine filter. So that should just clip in. There we go. This is just a preventative measure really, because we don't know the full history of this car, so it's better to be safe than sorry. Sort of like when you're buying a used car, you would never do that without checking it with Car Vertical. And now we can follow that with 10 litres of the good stuff. Because every used car has a story, and this is the only way of revealing it. Right, so I've run the car up to temperature and all seems good. Oil levels sitting perfect after putting exactly 10 litres in, and there's no obvious leaks, so that's a service completed. But you may remember we had a fault on the R8 when we got it to the body shop before Callum painted it and did a wonderful job. We had a leak spring on the way from the front radiator. Now while the bumper was off, I just tweaked some of the tabs ever so slightly, and ever since then I've not had the leak come back at all, which is great because that saves me quite a lot of money. But I want to make sure that this car is going to be solid, so we're going to pressure test the coolant system to make sure that that radiator isn't a weak point anymore, and if it's not, all good, and if it is, I'm going to send it off to be repaired. So my thinking here is I'm going to put it to a pressure which is still safe, but on a overly pressurised side of safe, if that makes any good sense. And I'm going to leave it for 10 minutes or so, so it's kind of higher pressure than it ever would be. And then if it does leak, then we'll know that it's gonna leak. If it doesn't, then we know it doesn't. There we go. So I've set it to 15 PSI or just over 1 bar. And I'm gonna leave that to chill for a bit and come back. Right, moment of truth on the pressure tester. And we can see she's still holding the 15 PSI. And underneath the car, dry as a bone. That's wicked. It must have just been a dry seal or something like that, but it's holding perfectly now, so that has saved me a lot of cash. That is good news, and we can move on. Okay, now that we're happy that this radiator isn't leaking, that means that we can button up the front bumper finally, and there's just a few extra bolts to put in basically, but I'm going to change out some of the nasty old looking ones for these nice new ones here. And well, I actually bought these for the under trays, but I thought not so important underneath, you don't see them as much, so these can go in the under trays, these can go in the bumper where you're going to see them more. Makes sense. And also, damaged bolts is a telltale sign of a crashed car, but like I said, we can tell whether a car's been crashed relatively easily by running it through Car Vertical. So all you've got to do is put your reg into Car Vertical's website and use discount code Chris, which is going to knock some money off your Car Vertical report as well. And now that we know the bumper doesn't have to come back off, we can fill the washer fluid up. Oh god, it's not a good pour. Oh, and by the way, I know this video is being filmed before Christmas, but it'll be going out after Christmas, so I hope you guys have had the best holidays and made the most of your time off work. So while I fit up the windscreen scuttle, let's take a look at this Audi R8 which we found on Car Vertical here. We can see it's got green ticks apart from on damage, and in the photos you can see it's been in a pretty nasty side-on accident and also set off all of the airbags inside the car, which ain't pretty. Now the worrying thing with this car is it's not an insurance write-off, which means if you used a lesser check-in service you'd never know that this car has been damaged. So this is why I recommend checking every single car that you're looking to buy using Car Vertical before you go to view it. So finally, just while I'm restoring these trims, make sure to use Car Vertical using the link in the description and discount code Chris to check a car out that you're potentially about to buy, a friend or family member's car, or even a car you already own. So this is how the trims look before I restored them, and this is what they look like after I've used G-Technics C4 on them. And is that not a complete transformation? If you want to grab some of yourself that, I'll leave a link and a discount code in the description. So these trims sit either side of the engine bay and really tidy it up, and definitely tidy it up even more now because they've been treated and looking proper. The next trim to go on is the door shut trim. Again, I've done the exact same process on these two. And then we can roll underneath on my new creeper and start fitting up the new under tray on the front. This is a brand new item. This is the one that was on back order. And then we've cleaned up the rest of them because they were looking pretty tatty after Mark had rallied them through his field. Now, in the whole process of this, there had been a fair few bolts which we've lost. Now, I did get some new ones from TPS with the under trays, but I think a few still went missing. So I'm going to have to order some extra ones when they open back up. But for now, we can fit up this freshly cleaned prop tunnel cover. And I know what you're thinking, it's not mud that was either side of that, it is kind of like a seam sealer. I don't know if it's been kind of dyed by the mud that it's been driven through or if it was always that colour or not, but it doesn't just wipe off at all, let me promise you that. Right, under trays are on and completed, and we've got all of the bolts in there, but that does open us up to another problem because I've run out of bolts. And normally that wouldn't be such a problem. I've got somewhere pretty much across the road which sells loads of bolts. You've got all the motor factors which are open, but it is now the festive season, meaning that everywhere is shut, so I cannot get any bolts to save the life of me. So I'm going to have to make do with what I've got lying around for now and then swap them out at a later date. Hopefully I've got enough to put these in because I really do want to go for a drive in it. So I had to make do with what I had lying around and get the under trays in place. Luckily the bolts are just M6s, but they're not quite as tidy as the nice T30 Torx head bolts which they use from factory. And there was quite a lot of them which we needed, probably about 50 or so bolts which we need to replace. I don't know why they use so many, it just seems a bit excessive, but it's just how they are, and there's nothing worse than having bolt holes with no bolts in them. But now we've got all of the arch liners in, one thing I do want to do is lower the suspension because Mark set this car for off-roading, which means the suspension was wound all the way up in the sky, and even though it probably wasn't actually much higher than standard, it'd be really nice to get a nice, clean, slightly lowered stance on this car to really complete the look. Now luckily those guys have done the majority of the work for me by fitting the coilovers. All I've got to do is adjust them, so I've just got to crack off the lower collar and then I can wind down the strut to lower the car, and then I've got full adjustability of it. Now the tracking on this car had never been done since the coilovers have been fitted, and also since we had to remove the steering rack to fit the anti-roll bar. So one final thing that we had to do was take it to my local tracking place and get this car set up properly to make sure that it's going to drive in a straight line. But after weeks of hard work, we can now go for a drive. Didn't trigger too many of you guys, but that is going to be it for the R8 project. We've only got a final few finishing bits to button up and that's it done. So I think I've quite enjoyed this one really. It's been a little bit different from the other projects, putting it back to standard and not going too crazy with it and keeping it like a future classic that it's going to be. But that's all. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel if you're not already, and if you've enjoyed the R8 build, we've got something new coming to the channel in the next week or two, so I'll catch you then.